You've got the story that the Democratic leadership just don't want told, where the Trump and TrueTide scandal and allegations are actually the less important weight loss story today, how a wife saved her veteran husband and exposed a horrible situation, and 8 people who prosecutors claim are part of Antifa were charged with 450 years in prison. We're talking about all that and even more on today's brand new Philip DeFranco show. You daily dive into the news, so let's just jump into it, starting with this. The socialists aren't just coming, they are here. That is what you have a lot of people saying right now after last night's Democratic primaries. Because as those results came in, it left Zoran Mamdani with what the New York Times described as a look of pure disbelief, with him describing the scene, saying his aides clapped their hands over their mouths. He and his chief of staff hugged for a moment under the gleam of a disco ball, and everyone around them bounced, cheering as if to say, was this all really happening? And adding, a state representative nearby was weeping. Or because all 3 of the candidates that Mamdani endorsed won their elections, and the energy in the room was nothing short of electric. But to understand why this seems like such a big deal, you also got to understand what the stakes were. Because Mamdani, he's only been mayor for like half a year. He's still building up his political capital. As much as people love to raise people up, they love to tear him down and root for failure. And he gambled a lot on a lot of these races. Because if his preferred candidates they had lost, that would have been a huge blow to his perceived clout, his abilities. Or what feels like this aura of charm and invincibility that he's cultivated around himself. Between Mamdani's leadership and trying to like do things that he promised in New York and the Knicks winning in New York, you got people there just describing it as like a Disneyland. But not only did they not lose, they won so big. 2 of them beat out sitting lawmakers, and the third beat the chosen successor to the outgoing incumbent. And easily the most heated race, I mean, we talked about it yesterday, was Mamdani's pick, Brad Lander, and the establishment pick, Dan Goldman. You had them going hard at each other over Israel. Goldman's wife got involved. The DOJ stepped in. It was crazy. Well, last night, Lander crushed his opponent. Though, he was very conciliatory in his victory speech.
I want to say to those who cast their votes for Dan, though we have some differences, I believe strongly that we actually have so much more in common. And I want to specifically praise him for how he responded to some of the toxic rhetoric that he and his staff faced over the past couple of days. With grace and with gratitude, that is something we need more of in our politics.
But, truthfully, Lander was expected to win. The real shock, that came when Claire Valdez won her race. And when her win got announced, oh my God, the pop. Also, the district that she's representing, it is often called the Commie Corridor. So that gives you kind of the idea of its political leanings if the crowd chanting DSA didn't already do that for you. Also, a quick fun fact, the guest DJ that was playing the music in that background is Chelsea Manning, right? The whistleblower who gave evidence of US war crimes to WikiLeaks. But anyway, you had Valdez making clear, this ain't about her, it's about the movement.
And make no mistake, this victory is not mine, it is ours. It belongs to the UAW, it belongs to New York City DSA.
But then the biggest upset of the night, it came from Mamdani's third pick, the person that would make him the political Seabiscuit. Oh wait, Seabiscuit never won any. Seabiscuit never won any Triple Crown. The person who would make him the political Triple Crown winner, Darializa Avila Chevalier, where she's a 32-year-old organizer and Democratic Socialist, and she just narrowly beat out Adriano Espaillat, the 71-year-old 5-term incumbent and chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. And not only did she win against a major establishment figure, she did so despite a social media footprint that would have sunk a lot of campaigns in the past. Or you had outlets from the New York Post to Politico to CNN reporting on her posts and reposts from several years ago, much of which she's since deleted, she's distanced herself from, where she voiced support for abolishing borders, prisons and police, seizing all property from landlords, dissolving private health companies, and nationalizing utilities, hospitals, and pharmaceutical giants. You also had people pointing out that she stated that Israel doesn't exist and that most of the political theory that she's read is communist, but the pyromania associated with anarchism is very intriguing to me. And then kind of just as the cherry on top, she once tweeted, "Fuck Kamala Harris." In fact, her ops even ran an ad with that, though it may have actually backfired, because there are a lot of leftists out there that agreed or even still agree with that sentiment. And so despite all of that history, or maybe in part because of, she still won. And what you had is in her victory speech, she honed in on what she said she's fighting for.
A community that deserves full investment and full funding in our childcare, in our schools, in our healthcare systems, in our babies, not bombs. I'm not concerned about the odds. In fact, I don't give a damn about the odds. I relish the challenge, and that is because I have faith.
But also one of the big things here is that, for the Democratic Socialists of America, these three candidates are only the latest chapter in the movement that began with Mamdani.
We are showing that last June, a year ago tomorrow, was not an anomaly. It was not the end. It was the beginning.
Right, you had them emphasizing that last night's victory, it is part of a long-term project to build a coalition that does what they say the Democratic establishment simply won't, namely end war, abolish ICE, tax the rich, and win universal health care. And so while Mamdani, who I think has really just put on a masterclass of political maneuvering, is refraining from direct threats, his organizers on the ground, they're pointing at Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and saying, you're next. So you should also note that the elections, they weren't a universal win for the DSA last night. You had more moderate candidates winning in Utah and Maryland, in no small part thanks to huge donations from AI companies, the crypto industry, and AIPAC. Also in New York's 12th district, the candidate that all the old guard kind of rallied behind, Micah Lasher, defeated a bunch of contenders to replace retiring Representative Jerry Nadler. And then you had incumbent Richie Torres, who's actually one of the most vocally pro-Israel members of the House, fending off a challenge from progressive candidate Michael Blake. And while notably you had Mamdani quiet on those races, other people, not so much. One of the people and one of the reactions that's gotten most of the attention is from Hassan Piker.
I'll see you in 2 years, motherfucker. Just wait. Richie, I'm coming for you, Richie. You think shit is sweet. Sit on that seat for the next 2 years. I'll see you in 2, Richie. The decade of socialism, it's coming to a neighborhood near you. When I said we were gonna let 1,000 Zoros bloom, this is what I meant. Hey, after tonight, my price went up. You have to be a Democratic Socialist if you want some of this shine.
And regarding Democratic Socialists, the DSA's membership has surged ever since the dam broke with Mamdani. Well, not universal. They've steadily been picking up win after win across the country. We're getting a Democratic Socialist into the general for LA's mayor, and then actually getting one elected to be DC's mayor last week. Also last fall, a self-identified socialist who's not officially part of the DSA won the race to be Seattle's mayor. And you've got Democratic Socialists aiming for congressional seats in Colorado, Florida, and Missouri this year as well. And actually after that, they're reportedly setting their sights on the White House. You have Politico reporting that the group's conducting surveys at its 250 local chapters this summer to get a feel for who members think should run in 2028. And while sadly for his fans, thanks to the US Constitution, Mamdani, he can't run to be president because he wasn't born in the country, there is then someone that's on the top of a lot of people's minds, and that is Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. So one of the things there is that she has so far declined to say whether she's considering a bid for the presidency, and rumor has it that she might be eyeing Chuck Schumer's Senate seat. But hey, with all of this, there's kind of a few different places to land. First, I should definitely note, just across the board, it's not really all smooth sailing for the far left from here, because despite all the hype from last night, it is still true that DSA-backed candidates haven't won a race outside of a major city yet. And then with that, you have some having the argument that the more they do win, the more ammunition Republicans have to terrify kind of old white people, as they've already been seeming to do.
Well, it actually happened a little faster than we thought it was going to, but the entire Democrat Party has collapsed because, well, the communists have taken over the Democrat Party. And not just the communists, the jihadist communists, who are a red-green alliance mix of radical Islam and Marxism, and it is now Zoran Mamdani's party.
But then also with that, Republicans aren't the only ones who are scared of the rise of the DSA. For many Democrats, they seem unhappy about that, and as well as just kind of pushing back against anyone that isn't super pro-Dem leadership. And I think one of the good examples of that came from Jamie Harrison. He's a former Dem chair, and he tweeted, "I say this with no ill will or animosity. If you hate the Democratic Party, then please do not run for our nomination. Don't use our resources, don't rely on our volunteers, don't use our infrastructure, don't ask Democrats to invest their time, money, and energy in your campaign. Focus on building the party you actually support. Political parties aren't perfect, but they're built by millions of people who knock doors, make calls, organize meetings, and fight for the values they believe in. If you don't believe in the party, then don't ask its members to carry you across the finish line." With him then seemingly getting such a verbal beatdown that he then followed up around 2 hours later with, "Let me be clear, I don't care if you're progressive, moderate, or conservative. I've worked with Democrats across the ideological spectrum. We didn't always agree, but we understood that building a stronger Democratic Party was part of the job. If you hate the party, spend your days attacking it, and have contempt for all the people who make it possible, then see above." But with that, Jamie, I'd say there's two problems there. One, you're doing that thing that people do where they go like, "Oh, if you do the most extreme thing, and that's how I'm going to talk about it," when there are just millions and millions of Democrats and independents and just people in general that think that what a lot of Dem leadership has done over the years and decades is really stupid and fucked up. But also with you being part of Dem leadership and the establishment, I understand why you would see critiques as attacks. And also I'm sure there's plenty of legitimate attacks in there, which is why then too, I found myself agreeing with Chris Murphy, who quote tweeted you and said, "I don't know, man, who is the Democratic Party if it's not the voters? Democratic voters choose candidates, not party leaders. And party leaders need to listen to what voters are telling us. And right now they are demanding our party be bolder." Of course, politics is so nuanced that I can't even agree fully with Chris Murphy's statement, because one of the big critiques of the Dem party has been that the Dem leadership hasn't fully embraced the will of the people when it comes to choosing nominees. Whether it be what seemed to many as collusion around Bernie Sanders and tearing him down for the ideal candidate for the leadership, or how many Democrats felt robbed because there wasn't a primary process because Joe Biden dropped out so late. But I do agree with the argument that a lot of Dems, they do want bolder politicians. They want their politicians to have more of a message and more of a goal than Orange Man Bad. And honestly, some of the people that have been best at communicating a message of the people rising up together, it's been a lot of Democratic socialists. We're talking about progressive populism, talking about cost, about the ability to get healthcare, about just living your lives, having a job, being able to get sick and get care for it and it not bankrupt you, not getting into pointless foreign wars of choice. And honestly, and it's not a direct one-to-one, you cannot be shocked when people look for new answers to the problem when all the previous answers have failed them. It's part of the reason Donald Trump was elected in the first place. In fact, there are people out there that voted for Donald Trump, or at the very least against Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris, because they wanted someone to break the system. With people thinking that he will fuck up so bad that people will look for any other sort of alternative that's not already on the table. But hey, time will tell. Is this rise of the DSA and this mindset, is it a flash in the pan, or is it the next step of the evolution of the Democratic Party? But then also, whether you're nodding your head, you're shaking your head, you leave in a comment, we then also have to talk about this other story out of New York, because a woman suspected an aide was secretly abusing her husband in a state-run veterans hospital. And so she set up a secret camera, she exposed the whole thing, and somehow not only did that aide still have his job months later, he was still being paid. Now the whole thing, it might have tipped off even more abuse running rampant in that facility for who knows how long.
You can see he was obviously hit with something. Everything about this video is awful.
Right, so this whole story begins with Albert O'Toole. He's a Gulf War veteran, and notably, while he was serving for the Marines, he was caught up in an explosion that gave him a traumatic brain injury. And years later, his wife Angela said that he was diagnosed with a devastating case of Alzheimer's. And when it eventually became apparent that she couldn't take care of him anymore on her own, Angela checked him into a federal VA facility in Montrose, New York. And for a while, it all seemed well and good. That is, until he was transferred across the street to a state-run home. Right, and this one is not VA, but then with that, all of a sudden, Albert starts rapidly declining. He's constantly agitated every time Angela visits. He's heavily medicated, and she even starts to notice bruises across his body. And so that's when she's like, I'm gonna get to the bottom of this, and she sets up that secret camera in his room. And what she found, it's straight up out of a horror movie. Because now caught on camera, you have Albert's aide yanking food out of his hands, slapping him, punching him, even grabbing him by the neck with both hands to slam him back into his wheelchair. At one point, you can even see this guy, Matthew Cox, whopping Albert over the head with the bottom of a broom. And then there's one part where you can't see either of them, but you can just hear Albert screaming in pain.
Ow, ow, ow. You hear him screaming and nobody comes to check on him. Where are the other aides? I don't know how I missed it. I was there every single night. I never dreamt that this would be our life. I can't even sleep anymore. I just watch him at night on that camera to make sure nobody's hurting him.
But then maybe the most infuriating part is, right, so all that happens in March. And then in April, after Angela reported it, Cox was arrested on felony charges of endangering the welfare of a person with disabilities. And while the State Department, they said that he was put on leave and later fired, turns out that up to this past weekend, Cox was still employed at the federal VA and was even still getting paychecks, or with all of it pending the outcome of the case. So then after you had News 12 New York exposing this fact, it went viral, and you had VA Secretary Doug Collins tweeting that even though this happened outside of a VA hospital, the VA was immediately initiating removal proceedings against him. But then also, if you're like, okay, hey, well, this is probably the best outcome we could hope for, at least it's all over, you then have to back it up. Because News 12, they also thought, let's check the other patients. Let's see how they're doing at the hospital. Let's make sure this wasn't an isolated incident. And unfortunately, what they found is that over the last 4 years, the same home that Albert was in has racked up more than 47 complaints and 25 citations. And those include deficiencies involving restraints, situations regarding medications, and failures to report suspected abuse, some of which had already led to people getting fired. Hell, even state auditors, they found failures to prevent and report alleged abuse last year during an inspection. And what you have now is, during a press conference, Angela levied even more accusations against the hospital.
I had walked out of the nursing home around 4 o'clock on March 1st after putting the camera in his room. And the abuse started at 4:15 on that day. I wasn't even out of the room 15 minutes before the abuse started. And that aide had been with my husband since late December, on and off, probably a good 5 times a week. The door was open, you hear my husband screaming, nobody comes to his aid, nobody checks. I'm sickened to think how many times that happened before I caught it on the camera.
They're going on to say that she reported it to the nursing home's administrator. The very first thing they told her was, you can't do that, as in you can't set up a camera in the room because of the privacy of Albert's roommate, to which then Angela replies,
he hasn't had a roommate since December, so there was nothing to worry about, and they were just upset because I had caught them. Since then, the reception that I get from anybody there is basically, like, we said sorry. While I was in the initial meeting with News 12, they shipped him to the Bronx and dumped him there at the Bronx VA campus, refused to take him back. So a man that has no time left lost another 2 months of his time when he doesn't have much time left.
And while she did successfully petition a judge to get Albert sent back to Montrose, only the state home where he was abused can take him, or to not the federal VA hospital next door. But also one of the big things here is in this press conference, Angela wasn't alone. She was also flanked by a group of state lawmakers calling on New York Attorney General Tish James and the state's health department to launch a full-scale investigation into this hospital.
The veterans in New York State, especially in this one particular nursing home, are not receiving the gold standard. And that is a failure of the system, that's a failure of the state, and it's only because of the courage of Angela that we have been made aware of it.
And so, yeah, with that, we're going to see what happens from here. But I guess, we have such little good news these days. I feel like I need to crown Angela our BAMF of the day. Because without her looking into this, without her taking the steps that someone else needed her to take, we don't get these results. Oh, and I guess on the opposite end of the coin, I then have to just send my worst wishes to Matthew Cox. Just my take. You're a tiny, disgusting piece of shit that probably should get launched into the sun. With that, of course, a reference to you being held responsible and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, legally. And then there's more that we gotta dive into in just a minute, but first, let me thank a sponsor and start with, Yingzi, you beautiful bastard. You are gonna be seeing Florence and the Machine, and all you had to do was enter our weekly $500 giveaway with SeatGeek. Because today's sponsor, SeatGeek, has doled out nearly $60,000 to you guys to get you off the couch and into the comedy club, stadium, a concert hall since 2024, and it's been so cool to witness. It's like so cool, I genuinely do not understand why some of y'all still have not done it, but spring is here and the events are stacking up. You got baseball, tours for Bruno Mars, Ariana Grande, and your favorite comedians. And I mean, let's just get out there, touch some grass, live, and hey, it's free to enter and it takes 2 seconds. Because SeatGeek, they're the #1 rated ticketing app with over 28 million downloads and tickets to over 70,000 events, sports, music, comedy, theater, you name it. Like, go now, look for tickets to literally anything. Just download the app or hit the link in the description and use code PHIL10 for 10% off your purchase on SeatGeek. New customers and all. And next, and this part is key, add that code to your SeatGeek account. That gets you the $10 off and enters you in for your chance to win the weekly $500 giveaway, no purchase required. And again, if you've used SeatGeek before, I'd never leave you out. Add code PHIL10 to your account and you're entered. Just scan that QR code or click the link below and add code PHIL10 and go make some memories. But then, diving right back into the news, we've got to talk about how the DEA allowed hundreds of thousands of fentanyl pills to hit the streets of New Mexico between 2023 and 2025 and intentionally chose not to do a damn thing about it. Because that's what we're learning thanks to this absolutely shocking new investigation from the Associated Press. An investigation that drew from both government records as well as interviews with 3 current and former DEA agents. Because reportedly, DEA agents, they repeatedly monitored shipments of fentanyl pills but chose not to seize them so that federal prosecutors could bring bigger criminal cases against drug traffickers. So I do want to note, well, some of you are going to be like, what the fuck? This is actually not an uncommon practice, especially with what we've seen with federal cases that are aimed at combating drugs like cocaine and heroin. The practice even has a name. It's called walking the drugs. And the idea is that by allowing drug transactions to be completed, they can trace narcotics through the supply chain and eventually take down entire trafficking operations. And you have supporters of that strategy saying that walking drugs, it actually saves more lives at the end of the day, and arguing that it allows officials to take out the heart of an entire operation rather than just stopping every single individual shipment. Though also the ethics and effectiveness of that practice, it's a whole other story, especially because when it comes to fentanyl, when you're walking that, it becomes much more problematic. It's just so much more deadly than drugs like cocaine and heroin. Just a few milligrams, you'll hear people say like the amount that can fit on the tip of a pencil is enough to kill the average adult. And that's why you had both agents and experts telling AP that the decision to let these enormous quantities of fentanyl pills just out there, it was shocking. Arguing this move is just a risky gamble that endangered public safety and communities in New Mexico, especially those in Albuquerque where most of the pills were distributed. And you had DEA Special Agent David Howell saying, "We poisoned our community to make cases. Through our own willful blindness, we get to say, we don't really know what happened to the drugs, but we 100% got people killed." And Howell's words really mean something here because he actually filed a whistleblower complaint over the practice in late 2023. And he also flagged deaths that he believed the policy may have been responsible for. Because you see, earlier that year, Howell was part of an investigation in which DEA agents surveilled a massive fentanyl transaction that happened at a mobile home park in Albuquerque, where traffickers delivered 74,000 pills that the agents chose not to seize. A decision that Howell described as providing 1 fentanyl pill to each person at a football stadium. And actually, just days earlier, investigators also watched the same trafficking ring deliver a spare tire that was hiding a suspected fentanyl shipment, one that they also did not confiscate. While Howell said that after months passed, the feds finally busted the traffickers, he also claimed that the authorities are still unable to account for the unseized shipments to this day. And then also a big thing you have to consider is the timing of all this. First up, it came at the height of the fentanyl epidemic, with the CDC estimating that there were more than 76,000 deaths from synthetic opioids in 2023 alone. And while the number, it's since fallen over the last few years, New Mexico especially, has been at the epicenter of the epidemic. While overdose deaths fell 14% nationally last year, in New Mexico, they had a 21% spike. But then also regarding the timing of that 2023 incident, it appears that it may have violated DEA policies that were in place at the time. Right? According to the AP, the DEA adopted fentanyl protocols in 2017 that directed that agents should seize or otherwise prevent the distribution of fentanyl as soon as practicable. And the protocols explicitly stated that protecting public safety is paramount regardless of whether seizures might compromise investigation. But then in 2024, the DOJ rewrote the rules to say that investigators may exercise discretion in determining whether to take action to prevent the trafficking of fentanyl, and also allowing them to balance public safety risks against, quote, the benefits to be achieved through preserving the investigation. And while it's unclear exactly when in 2024 those rules were changed, what we do know is that Howell continued to report instances of the DEA's willful failure to seize fentanyl. And that includes an instance in early 2024 where he claimed that agents observed separate deliveries of 150,000 and 50,000 fentanyl pills. Now, notably here, the Office of Special Counsel, the agency tasked with protecting whistleblowers, initially found a substantial likelihood of wrongdoing, and they took the very rare step of asking the DOJ to investigate. But then you had the DOJ's Office of Professional Responsibility finding in 2024 that the DEA and the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Mexico had made reasonable decisions when they let the drugs go unseized, writing that their inaction did not pose a specific danger to public health. But both current and former agents, they say they couldn't understand how the agency could actually come to that decision. Right? How did they determine that the tactic didn't endanger the public, and noting that fentanyl is so dangerous that it literally has to be handled in a specialized lab? But as a result, the DEA continued to let huge amounts of fentanyl just hit the streets of New Mexico. And in fact, we had a former DEA supervisor telling the AP that he and his colleagues in Albuquerque, they permitted millions of pills to go unseized as part of a multi-state investigation last year. And you had Howell reporting in his whistleblower disclosures that agents had allowed delivery of at least 1.8 million fentanyl pills. But all of this, or at least part of it, led to what many supporters of this practice say is a huge win. Right? That investigation ended in the largest fentanyl bust in DEA history. You might remember it was announced in May of 2025 by then Attorney General Pam Bondi, who claimed that the crackdown resulted in the seizure of more than 3 million pills. But even there, among a number of critiques, you had a former supervisor saying that the DEA could have taken down the organization 6 months earlier, and adding the amount we ultimately seized was hitting the streets every month while that case was going on. Well, now in response to this article, you had the DEA defending its past efforts, saying in a statement that the investigative decisions at issue were lawful, reasonable under the circumstances, and consistent with department guidance. They then also went on to claim that the public descriptions suggesting that DEA knowingly permitted fentanyl to reach communities are false and fundamentally mischaracterize the facts. And that's as the U.S. Attorney's Office in Albuquerque claimed that the conduct that Howell reported had happened during the prior administration. But then with that, you had Howell and the DEA supervisor telling the AP that it was Bondi, right, Trump's AG, who announced and took credit for the historic DEA bust in May of 2025. But, the reaction to this, depending on where you're getting it, very different reactions. And so I do want to pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts here? And specifically, the practice of walking drugs, and also even more specifically, walking fentanyl. But then next up from that, let's talk about this news that I think might be a good lesson in how internet rumors start. Because the way that you have this start is with a report from Stat News yesterday about Eli Lilly giving access to an experimental obesity drug to a 79-year-old patient. It's called Reddit TrueTide. If you are even remotely on fitness, TikTok, or those feeds, you've heard a lot about it. You got people taking it. You've got a lot of people wanting to take it. And so far, it's been proven to be very effective for weight loss. But it is not FDA approved yet. And according to Stat, Eli Lilly and the FDA have allowed one person to gain access to the drug via compassionate use, which lets patients with serious and life-threatening medical issues access experimental drugs. And a clinician apparently ordered it to treat someone for refractory obesity with obstructive sleep apnea and pulmonary hypertension. The person was reportedly 79 years old when the request was made in April, and so you had sources saying it drew the interest of top health officials, suggesting the person receiving this drug was well connected. And so then, with that stage set, you had people going, okay, who is 79 in April, is generally a big person, is well connected. A lot of people going, is it Donald Trump? And what you saw is that the reporters at Stat, they did the same mental math. But with one writing, given the demographics and the peculiar nature of the application, I asked the White House if this patient was President Trump. And adding, I did not get a direct answer. And so the fact that the White House didn't give an answer, it kind of just created this space for people to run wild with the theory. Right? And so you have people kind of just compiling evidence to prove it. And they also didn't have to look that far back to try to do that. Because, just yesterday, Trump gave remarks praising Eli Lilly.
Because right here in Lehigh Valley, Eli Lilly has just announced, great company, by the way, drug company, a $3.5 billion investment.
And then you had Trump, he's told this story before. It is actually, I am not a fan of the man, but I just appreciate this story. He started talking about weight loss drugs and that friend who's apparently using them.
Who takes the fat drug? And a friend of mine who's extremely fat, sloppy, but very brilliant. He's a brilliant businessman, but he's a slob. There's no question about it. Very neurotic person, which you need sometimes to be successful. But he said, President, I just came over here and I bought, I won't say Ozempic or whatever the hell it was, but I bought the fat drug. I said, I didn't know you used it because it's not working. And I used him as, he's begging me not to use his name, so I won't, but he's a very successful guy. He's actually a pretty well-known guy, brilliant business guy. Worth a lot of money.
And well, with that story, you have a lot of people wondering, who the hell is this friend that he is just roasting? you also had some saying it sounded like Trump was really just describing himself. Especially because, again, this is not the first time he's told this story. And actually, this popped one of the last times because you had a lot of people think that he was talking about Elon Musk. But now, with all the people that were running these theories, you had the White House kind of ending this and shutting the rumors down. Or with a rapid response account writing, no, it wasn't President Trump, and you people are truly sick and deranged. The spokespeople also slamming the reporter who said that she asked the White House for comment, and the White House Director of Communications writing, how is this a real quote? You're just a big idiot. You certainly made a name for yourself by completely embarrassing yourself at the expense of being thirsty for clicks and peddling falsehoods. You know, the deputy press secretary also saying, because this has to be spelled out for Lizzie Law, who has proven herself to be an unserious gossip columnist, this application was not for the president. Though again, like, it does appear she in fact asked them prior to publishing only to get the runaround. And I do have to add, even though I didn't think that it was the president taking this, and I also don't care if it was or it wasn't, act like people are crazy to think that it might have been Trump is so stupid. Like, people have eyes, they see how he looks. The age in these stories, it seems to possibly connect. He has also talked about making GLP-1s more accessible to the general public. So it's not the craziest leap, especially if you do not give a comment when asked for comment. But then also, while we're on this topic, I have to note, like, this isn't even the biggest controversy regarding weight loss drugs today. Because on the other end of the spectrum, we're now seeing reports about parents giving their young elementary age kids GLP-1s in a desperate attempt to fight childhood obesity. And actually with that, you have doctors talking to the Wall Street Journal and saying that childhood obesity is actually very hard to fight. And the consequences, they're severe. Right? Specialists are seeing high blood pressure, poor blood sugar control, liver dysfunction in kids as young as 4 years old, and children dealing with issues this severe, they generally don't grow out of it. And with this, you had one doctor adding, I see kids who have developed type 2 diabetes at 10, 11 years old and saying they need help so desperately. Then also with this, most GLP-1s, they're only approved for kids as young as 12 years old, though they are also being tested on kids as young as 6. So doctors, they've been having to go off label to prescribe them, and it's been a controversial choice. Right? There are some fears that it could lead to insufficient nutrient intake that could harm bone growth and puberty. And then on top of that, these are drugs that really only work while you're on them. So if you stop, you're going to gain the weight back, and we don't know if there are consequences to starting it as a kid and then this just going on for decades and decades. Which is why you had one doctor saying we don't have enough evidence to safely prescribe under 12 at this point. Adding, I think that potential is there for positive impact, but there are not enough studies yet. And whatever your opinion here, like, this is a serious issue. Around 1 in 5 kids in America, they deal with obesity. It's as you have parents trying other methods first, right? The Journal talking to parents who completely changed their kids' diets, enrolled them in sports. They started doing family exercise only to see the kids still gaining weight. And so with that, you had one doctor who's been prescribing the drugs to kids under 12 saying, we don't know what the long-term effects could be, and that can be scary and unsettling. But then adding, I do know that having obesity when you're 7, especially severe obesity, is very likely going to lead to, for sure, a reduced quality of life, premature mortality likely, really not a good life. So once again, God, we have a lot of things that I want to hear from you on today. What are your thoughts with any of this, whether it be the Trump stuff or what's happening with the kids? And then there's even more that we got to dive into in just a minute. But first, let me thank another sponsor and say, one of the biggest travel scams, it's landing in another country and immediately having to figure out your internet. I'm tired. I've been on a plane. I just want directions to the hotel. I don't want to compare SIM cards, fight with my carrier, or finance my roaming fees. And that's why I use today's sponsor, Saily, whenever I travel abroad. Saily is an eSIM app from the team behind NordVPN that works in 200 plus destinations worldwide. Setup simple. Download the app, pick a plan, install the eSIM, done. When you land, you're connected. No airport kiosk, no SIM card surgery. You don't need a new eSIM every time you visit another country. They've also launched Saily phone numbers, and as someone who's traveled internationally, that's just kind of one of the best features that just makes sense. You get a real US number right inside the app, which means calls, texts, apps that require a US number, and those inevitable 2-factor authentication codes actually work while you're abroad. And again, no contracts and no extra physical SIM to deal with. Plus, Saily helps block trackers, malicious sites, and annoying ads. So hey, if you got travel coming up, scan that QR code or download the Saily app and use code PHIL for 15% off your plan. That's code PHIL for 15% off. Download Saily today and stay connected wherever you go. And then diving into your final block today, more news you need to know. Let's talk about how a terminally ill child under the age of 12 was euthanized in the Netherlands for the first time since they expanded their euthanasia laws. Now, the doctor, they could get in trouble. You had Dutch Health Minister Sophie Hermans revealing all this when she presented a report from the committee that reviews medically assisted deaths of children. And while she didn't give any details about the exact age of the patient and what they were sick with, because this was a child based on protocol, the case is being pushed up to their public prosecution service to determine if the doctor met all the requirements to use euthanasia. Because 2 years ago, the Netherlands legalized euthanasia for kids between 1 and 12. And before that, euthanasia was only an option for babies under 1 and kids over 12. But with this expansion, you had their government saying euthanasia is only allowed for patients whose unbearable suffering with no prospect of improvement has a medical dimension. And adding that this can be the case with somatic diseases such as cancer or cardiovascular disease. Then doctors also having to refer to a hefty checklist before approving euthanasia. So just to name a few, outside of getting parental consent, they have to determine that the patient isn't under duress, decide if their suffering is unbearable with no prospect of improvement, and they have to make sure that there is no reasonable alternative to euthanasia. And as far as the impact, when the law first expanded, there were only about 5 to 10 kids who were known to actually meet all those requirements, which is why this case is being seen as the first of its kind there. And so they're looking into it, and if it turns out they did not meet the requirement, the doctor could face fines and up to 12 years in prison. prison. And so we should have more information soon, but in the meantime, I would really love to know your thoughts around this situation and kind of just euthanasia in general. But then, bring back the news to the US, you have 8 people who prosecutors said have Antifa ties. They just got 450 years collectively after a protest gone wrong, with former Marine Benjamin Song getting 100 years behind bars for shooting an officer, and then other people at the protest getting decades, 50 years, 70 years, and the judge calling their actions an assault on democracy. Because you have the DOJ claiming that the last 4th of July, these Antifa cell operatives shot fireworks and vandalized cars in a guard kiosk at the Prairie Land ICE Detention Center in Texas. You have the charges including things like rioting, using weapons and explosives, providing material support to terrorists, and obstruction. And the authorities, they deemed Song the leader of this group, and he was convicted of attempted murder after prosecutors said that at one point he yelled, "Get out the rifles," he opened fire and wounded an officer who had just arrived on the scene. So you had Song's attorney saying that Song was shooting suppressive fire after the officer aggressively got out his firearm soon after he arrived, and specifying that the officer was hit by a bullet that ricocheted. And since Song could have gotten a minimum of 20 years with a sentencing as steep as the one that he got, his attorney says they plan on appealing. Adding Song, aside from this day, has had an impeccable life. A former Marine, a good student, he had a lot of good qualities that were just ignored, saying the judge just went ahead and gave as much as he could. And that's the main argument that you've kind of seen people having supporting the people who were charged here. And with that, you had Song's attorney saying, our issue with this case has always been that this isn't a bunch of terrorists. This is a bunch of kids and young adults who really have a really big heart and really wanted their voice to be heard. It was never intended that anybody get hurt. It was never intended that any shots would be fired. And the protesters have also denied having any so-called Antifa connection, saying that they were there to support immigrants in the detention center. But of course, that's not how Trump's camp sees it. Or you've had Antifa, or whatever they're calling Antifa, being one of the administration's biggest targets. Last year, Trump even officially made it a domestic terrorist organization, which of course for many was wild because Antifa, which is short for anti-fascist, isn't a group. It's not an actual thing. Right? It's kind of an umbrella term for groups on the left that fight against things like neo-Nazis and white supremacist groups. But countless experts have explained that they're not a centralized group. But even still, you had Todd Blanche saying that these sentences make clear that Antifa terrorists who attack law enforcement and federal facilities will face swift and uncompromising justice. And then last up today, you got Mark Zuckerberg stepping into the predictions market game. Because Zuck, he's apparently started working on an app called Arena, which really appears to be similar to apps like Polymarket and Kalshi. But the only difference is that apparently users won't be betting real money, at least at first. Instead, they'll be betting with a video game-esque point system. But sources say that they haven't really ruled out eventually letting users bet with real money, especially because insiders have described Arena as experimental, but a top priority right now, reframing it as Zuck's, quote, broader push to create new types of apps based on emerging social behavior. But with all this, you have some critics saying it feels like it's bigger than just creating competition, with, for example, Senator Richard Blumenthal saying Meta copied slot machines to addict kids to Instagram. Now Zuckerberg is turning his company into a prediction market, claiming that Meta's business model is profiting from addiction, kids, gamblers, and more. And that's as, notably, Facebook and other social media platforms have become a legitimate form of addiction by themselves at this point. And so then on top of that, you then have the optics of an app like Arena, and you've got people going, oh, okay, it's raising some red flags. But also, I'll say at this point, the app is still in its early stages, and side sources have said that there's still no 100% guarantee that it's even going to come out. But if it does, yeah, you have a number of people concerned. But that, my friend, you beautiful bastard, is the end of your Wednesday Philip DeFranco show. But the show can still go on, because you should definitely check out today's brand new episode of Crashing Out with myself and Alex Perlman. I will say, with just how ridiculous and stupid and annoying a lot of things are, this was probably one of my favorite episodes to shoot recently. And you're definitely going to want to stay to the end. The last 30 minutes are very interesting as well, so you can click or tap to watch there. I also got a link to it in the description. But hey, no matter what you do, let me just say thank you for watching. I love yo faces, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Don't let the lamestream media fool you into believing that there is anything more important right now than pool news.
I will hunt down every microscopic plant biome, and I will kill it with my teeth.
Once you showed me what this man looks like, I said, that man did nothing wrong.
That's a Dick Tracy villain.
And Trump's doing what he does best, bringing other people together.
It is me, Pepe Pizzeria. I am now the foreign minister of Italy.
Half of me is very offended right now.
We are going to do fantasy baseball with the cast of Toy Story.
First pick of the Crashing Out draft, I pick